Hey, how's it going? So today I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the London variation and how we can kind of attack it a little bit better. So Agadmatur, he has some really good examples. Like he basically suggests playing queen to b6 here, threatening an attack on b2. I don't think that's a bad move at all, but what if there was something a little bit better? In my opinion, if we do this knight to d5, a little bit early. If you see there, the computer eval does go a little bit in white's favor, but that quickly changes as soon as they do kind of the main line of bishop to g3, and then we play queen to b6. So, I mean, I think the queen to b6 move is really good. I do like the knight here a little bit earlier. There is a trap that you do need to be aware of if you're playing against people, and that's knight to a3. So, if they play knight to a3, and you just play queen takes on b2, they do knight to b5. I would highly recommend against playing this a6 move. So if you see here, it is the most popular move. It actually has a decent win rate for black, but there's a pretty significant problem with it. And if you do a6 here, they do rook b1, we take with the queen, rook back, and you think, hey, maybe that's a perpetual, and not so fast. So queen goes back, and then the move that we're waiting for is, of course, c4. So the reason this is nasty is, I mean, they're attacking c7. You have to move your knight away. If you capture their knight, you get their rook. I mean, they get your rook, and it puts you in a kind of difficult situation. So I would recommend against this knight a6 move, or I mean the a6 move, and you can play either queen to b4, or you can do knight to a6, but if you do knight to a6, the game's likely to end in a draw. So if you do knight to a6, they do rook to b1, queen takes, there. And the c4 doesn't work, but they can put you in kind of a perpetual. So if they take here, obviously you can't do this yet because you just take the knight. So that's why this actually gets to be a little bit dangerous. Don't play a6 here. It looks attractive, but it's kind of a nightmare. So, anyways, with regards to that, that's not the main line. They'll primarily play b3. And in this case, what I recommend actually is just to do an early d6. And d6, it opens your bishop up. It has a couple responses here. If they do c4, then we can just, actually I recommend doing this queen to a5 move. Then they go with, if they do king to d2, if they do knight to d2, I think that would work. But if they do queen to d2, we just capture. If they take back with the knight, then we just go here and we're attacking this square. And the king has to move, we take here, and it gives us a kind of interesting game. If they take with the king, which is actually better, then you do not want to move here. You should probably just move back to f6. So these are validated with the engine. Don't play knight to b4 there, they can kick your knight away, and then you have to either go here or here, and you're getting a lot slower. They're developing their queen side a little bit, and it gives you a difficult game to kind of play. So, anyways, in regards to that, they can also play, or you do d6, they might do bishop to c4, and I think I haven't looked into this one too much. Maybe take, I did look at this one. It's kind of fun if they take, then you trade the bishop for the knight by doing a queen check there, but it's not too crazy. It doesn't give you a huge advantage or anything. It's an interesting game to play. You're not necessarily better or worse. And then if they don't play the main line, we can sometimes capitalize on early mistakes. It's hard to capitalize with this knight to a3 line. I think that you might be able to do something with the queen to b4 after doing this. It might make sense to do an early queen to b4. I'm not sure. You definitely don't want to do queen x b2, but you can do knight takes on c3, and this does lead to an interesting kind of variation where you exchange the queens pretty early, and that's an interesting line that you could play as well there. So, I mean, there's a lot of options you can do depending on how you want to play, and if they do anything besides c3, this does lead to a basically win for you. So, anyways, let's go to some of the early mistakes that someone can make. Because when you're playing an opening, it's really good to know how someone can kind of mess up. And these moves aren't mistakes. They are decent moves for the most part, and they just lead to things that can be kind of confusing. So we take, then we do e6, which is recommended by the computer. They do knight to f3, queen to b2, and then if they do rook to b1, we take the pawn. If they do c4, we take on d4. They take there, we have a bishop check, knight to d2, queen takes d4. So it gives us a couple different lines that we can do if they make a mistake here even, which is fairly common, as common as doing rook to b1, which does that. The best move here is, of course, king to d2, but not as many people play it. And I mean, your king's kind of, they lost the right to castle, the king's in the middle of the board. It's definitely not bad, but it looks kind of weird to me, and it looks like it's going to be a hard game from White's perspective. Maybe that's wrong, I don't know for sure, but it does look like a fun kind of variation that you can play. So let's say that they do an early, instead of doing knight to c3, I think that's the variation we just covered. Let's say that they did queen to c1. Then we just take, then if they do knight f3, queen to b6. And I mean, it's not hugely in anyone's favor, but these are just some of the different alternatives you can do. I think there was actually a trap in here, possibly after bishop c4, we do queen to b4, then if they do knight to d2, captures, they capture, trade queens. You don't have to trade queens, it'd be better to do queen takes on b2, but if you do trade queens, then, I mean, you're up a pawn, and they don't really have that much play, and it's kind of getting close to an endgame. Definitely nothing wrong with taking the pawn there. It might be a little bit more confusing, I don't know for sure, but you have a pretty comfortable game regardless of which option you choose. So that's a fun kind of line that you can remember in this kind of circumstance, and it'll hopefully allow you to capitalize on some of the mistakes. They do e4, then you just do knight to f6, attacking the pawn, and it leads to a decent game for you as well. So if they don't do they do queen to c1 and they don't take back, then, and I mean, they don't take back in quite a few games, so you have very good chances of winning here. It is good to know this bishop c4 one, because White actually has performed well here, even though it's not the right move. So that's just one extra variation there. Let's say that we went to we covered knight a3. I don't really have too much there, but let's say they did c4 instead. Then we do queen takes, and then if they do knight to d2, it allows us to do knight to c3, which attacks the queen. You'll trade some pieces off, you'll move the knight here, you'll constrict their position quite a bit. So it leads to some pretty fun variations there. But if they take here, and I actually recommend against doing this queen x to b2 move, because if they take the knight, you can actually end up in a lot of trouble. I can show that line really quick, but if they do take the knight, you can still play this, but it's definitely giving white an advantage. So they do queen to c2, then you would probably want to do knight to a6, bishop takes, pawn takes, then of course knight to f3, the knight's going to route to here and here. Attacking your queen, you're probably going to want to move the rook at some point to b8 to prevent the, and you do d6 first to allow it to kind of go to b8, because you're going to trade the rook for the knight. But this does not look like a fun game to kind of play in these kind of lines. So I mean, maybe it's your idea of fun, but this doesn't look very easy to hold. And it looks, I mean, you traded the rook back. It looks like white's position is way more dynamic than yours. You have to play incredibly carefully. There's probably one moves that you can do to not lose the game. If you take on d4, they're going to just move the queen here, castle, eventually put the rook on c1, and it just makes your game incredibly difficult. So I would recommend against playing this line for that reason. You can by all means still do it, but it's probably better just to do knight to f6. It doesn't give you as good of a game, but it prevents some of that craziness from happening over the board. And then let's say that instead of c4, I think that's all the lines I have in here right now. So I think that some of these are a bit less frequent. I mean, they're not completely unknown, but I just didn't have too much on them at this point. So let's say that instead of doing 3e3 though, they did one of these other variations. So, I mean, you'll sometimes see one of these instead of the e3 move. So for example, d5, we do b5, and then if they do a4, just b4. And a lot of these lines, if they do knight to f3, I think we still just do, I guess it recommends doing like queen to a5. I don't know if d6 is actually, it doesn't look, I don't know, it doesn't look terrible, but I wouldn't necessarily want to do that. But you can kind of go through these lines a little bit where you're kind of doing bishop g7, has f3, e6, takes. I mean, these aren't crazy exciting in this kind of variation. I think it gives you a decent game, but I can't say much more than that. If they do c3, we do queen b6, they do queen b3 primarily, then we takes, and then knight c6, e3, and then knight to b4. And then we're of course threatening this square here, and if they do knight to a3, they're fine. If they do king to d1, they're fine. If they do king to d2, we have a lot of fun, because we get to move the knight here. And so if they go king c1, we have this square. If they do king e2, we have this square. So regardless of where they go, we just go with the other knight that's not being attacked by the king and attack the square. And then we get a rook. So gives us a really good position if they play the c3 line. Well, not from that place, but it's kind of a fun experience there. If they take with c5, we do knight to a6, kind of attacking this square. In general, if they do knight to c3, we just take back on the knight. But if they do like queen to d4, we do queen to a5. And then if they protect with the knight, then we take with the knight. If they do like c3, I think we take with the queen. Because if you take with the knight, there's a fork here. Yeah. So you want to make sure that you're not getting forked, and it leads to a kind of interesting game for yourself if you do that. And then if they move with the knight there, you can. In a lot of these lines, you should probably just take with the queen. Like if it's bishop d2, you take with the queen. If it is knight there, you do take with the knight. So when there's not a huge problem with it, you do probably want to take with the knight. I'm kind of interested about this b4 move in this case. Okay, so you just do knight to e6, the queen has to move, and then you can move your queen as well. Kind of curious about the c3 move, of why that doesn't also work, because I'm pretty sure if you take with the knight here, b4, then knight to e6, takes. Oh, because you basically traded it for a pawn, so since it's protected there. Okay. So in that case, you can kind of see why it's a mistake in most of those. If they do e3, you don't want to take back with the queen. You want to either move it away or perform something like g6. d6 is wrong. It is the most popular here. Don't play it. Allows them to attack, takes, and then, I mean, it's not terrible, it's just this doesn't look like a fun game to me. You have doubled pawns here, the bishop's attacking, you haven't developed much, and white they have a better pawn structure. It looks like a difficult game to play if you play d6 there. So don't. So what you should actually do is either g6, queen to a5, or queen to c6. Queen to c6 seems to have pretty decent results, so maybe do that. If they do knight to a3, knight to c5, and it's a difficult game, but you still haven't lost in the opening at least, or aren't in a bad position necessarily in the opening. So let's say that they do, instead of c3, well, let's say instead of, I guess we just did, I think c3 here. Say they took, knight takes. I think this is the one we just covered maybe. But you'll probably take this pawn back, but I think that's pretty much all I had for kind of this London opening. So I do hope that some of these lines were interesting for you, and I do hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you again for watching. Have a good one. Bye.